Water levels. Do these two words in succession send chills down your spine? If so, you're not alone, and you've probably been playing video games as long as I have. This type of level has often gotten a bad rep in the video game realm, but why is that? After doing some reflecting, a little bit of research, and tapping into a little common sense, I've come to the conclusion that it all comes down to their inherent design. Water levels, or sections of games with water in them, are always obviously meant to emulate the concept of being submerged in water. Obviously, this contrasts with the other levels by changing the way your character moves, changing the typical running motion to swimming, and almost always results in you moving more slowly. This reason right here is a good simple summary as to why water levels feel so frustrating. Slow, stilted movement is not conducive at all to the action or platformer genres of video games, in which many of these aquatic stages appear. In addition, seeing as water levels are almost always the exception to the rule for level designs in these games, their inclusion is all the more jarring, as they are an immediate contrast to what the player is used to already. And the resulting slowdown and change often kills the pace of the game, causing a certain level of frustration for the player. I want to illustrate my point a little more by going over a few examples of games that fall victim to the poor design choices that seem to be inherent in most water levels. Super Mario Bros. For the NES is about as straightforward as a game can get. You run from left to right, jump on mushrooms and turtles, all while trying to avoid getting hit or falling to your death in pits that lead to, well, who knows. Despite its simple gameplay and design, it resonated with gamers of all levels of experience because its super tight controls and fluid pace made it a joy to play. Jumping was spot on and running had momentum. It was a perfect example of a developer getting a game's controls just right. So the player carried on in this blissful gameplay until they reached World 2-2, where shit immediately hit the fan in the form of the game's very first water level. Immediately, the expectations of the player are completely flipped on their head. No longer are you jumping and running along, occasionally stomping on a mushroom or two, but now you are expected to swim from left to right and are much more vulnerable to taking damage. The gameplay and controls have totally been changed. Before, you used B to run and A to jump on platforms and enemies, and if you had a fire flower you could shoot fireballs using B. Now, jumping is no longer an option. Instead, you must repeatedly press A to swim and move forward, and your only way of disposing of enemies is with a fireball, so you better hope you got one. Even then, the trajectory of the fireball can make defeating enemies tedious, so you'll likely be spending most of your time avoiding enemies while repeatedly mashing A and holding the D-pad right. Yeah, not quite as fun as before, though even this could be forgivable, except Mario's movement becomes so damn slow and floaty that it is no longer in any way fun. The controls are completely awkward and sluggish. If you don't press A, Mario will just walk along the bottom of the water at a snail's pace. And if you do press A, Mario will ascend and go a little faster, but potentially put himself in harm's way if you're not careful, since the controls have a more floaty feel to them. It's just a lot more tedious and slow than the rest of the game, and really stands out in a platforming game that is more about quick gameplay and smooth controls. Sonic the Hedgehog is a video game franchise that has survived on the gimmick of making your character go super fast for over 20 years now. Speaking about the older games, many players have written them off as cheap and less challenging counterparts to the Super Mario series. And sure, they may have a bit of a point on that one, but I still think there's something to be said about zooming through levels at exhilarating speeds, while your silly fox friend tries and ultimately fails to keep up with your Usain Bolt-like speed. With that said, for a Sonic game to work there needs to be that speed factor to facilitate the expected pace of the series, or else you might as well really be playing a crappy alternative to Mario. After playing many of the 2D Sonic games, my biggest question is this. Why the hell are there water levels in Sonic games? In a game where you're expected to go really fast all the time, these water levels stick out even more like a sore thumb. Just look at this. It completely kills the pace of the game. Gotta go fast? My ass. Not only does the water completely slow you down, but if you want to survive and get out of a mess you found yourself in, you better hope you find one of the scarcely placed air bubbles before you drown. Now the game requires you to hurry up to survive, but you can't because you can't go fast anymore because the water makes you slow as shit, and then the whole situation turns into a frenzied shit show that is way more of a pain to play than the rest of the experience. As a cherry on top of the crap cake, the music that plays during the countdown to your death by drowning is one of the most horrifying pieces of music ever written. Just listen to this. I honestly think that this song may subconsciously be part of the reason I have such an aversion to water levels.
It just haunts dreams.
So these are just a few examples of many games with not so great water levels out there. So what does this all mean? Are all water levels inherently bad because of poor design choices that always seem to slow the pace of the game? It sure seems like it, but it actually is not the case. And one revitalized game series shows us exactly how to do a water level the right way, and that is the Rayman series. Rayman Origins and its sequel, Rayman Legends, were both fantastic games for a myriad of reasons, not the least of which were their excellent design choices. The controls and platforming were super tight, the level design and enemy placement were genius, and the pace and flow of the game were perfectly complemented by these other strong design choices. As a fan of the platforming genre, with a cynical view of said genre's recent dip into the derivative, this series revitalized my enthusiasm about the game type with its high level of quality and great balance between being tough and forgiving, linear and explorative, fast-paced and skill-based. But, well, shit. They have water levels too. So do these ones fall into the same problems that plague many other water levels from a large number of other games? Well, if my thesis is that water levels are typically not fun for the user because of the way they make the game sluggish or introduce new unnecessary game mechanics, then the new Rayman games actually succeed in doing the exact opposite. First things first, in terms of the pacing in these levels compared to the rest of the game, it feels as though there is almost no change at all. While swimming in the water, Rayman channels his inner Michael Phelps and swims around at about the same speed that he runs. This breaks the trend of most water levels killing the pace of the game, eliminating the frustration a player gets when they are suddenly a lot less agile than they were in the previous level. They also give Rayman a cool swimming animation to add to the idea that he's actually swimming at top speed. So, you know, that's nice. Aside from the platforming and jumping on enemies, the main method of attack for Rayman to dispose of his enemies throughout most of the levels is his spin attack. This attack is still executed in the same way, with the same effects and results, and doesn't require of you any more precision than you're used to. Like in Super Mario Bros., your option to jump has been taken away, but unlike Mario, you don't need to rely on a limited ranged attack to defeat your enemies. Of course, despite keeping the crucial elements to the gameplay while you're in the water, the change in setting also results in new game mechanics and situations. Unlike the frantic bubble hunt in Sonic the Hedgehog, however, these new aspects are not a detriment to the experience. Just as an example, there are glowing prickly seaweed type things that you must maneuver around in tight spaces, kind of like in Ninja Turtles for the NES, but not shitty. While you're trying to get around these, there are claw creatures that chase after you, which you cannot hit and must avoid, as well as many other things. If these were placed into any of the other water levels mentioned, it would be a nightmare. But because Rayman Origins and Legends don't sacrifice the tight, precise controls and fast pace for a more quote-unquote realistic and sluggish experience in the water, these moments are just as fun and exhilarating as anything else in these games. Thanks for listening, everyone. This was my first attempt at a video, so if you have any criticisms you'd like to leave, please hit them down in the comments, and if you liked what you saw, please feel free to subscribe and expect more soon. Thank you.